Thank you. Welcome, everyone. I'm Rosa Carrillo, and I'm the author of The Relationship Factor in Safety Leadership. And I just want to take a moment for each of us here in the room, the Zoom room, to just say your name and where you are, and if you're working with a company or just very briefly, just who you are. So why don't we start with Phil? Oh, Philip is muted. How about you, Bill?
Hey, I'm Bill Nelson. I'm in Houston, Texas. Retired about 3 years ago from DNVGL. Before that, spent a lot of time at the Idaho National Laboratory and also 3 years at the Halden Reactor Project in Norway.
Oh, wonderful background. Phil?
So I'm currently in the United Arab Emirates. So I've spent 42 years in the nuclear industry. I'm over here as a safety culture specialist.
So are you connected to Lisa?
No, I don't think we've met.
No, I don't
nice
think
to
we
meet
have.
you.
Lisa, where are you? I'm
in the Netherlands.
Okay.
But you worked with, why don't you just talk a little bit about,
Sure. I'm Lisa Landy. I'm one of the hosts for the Safety View. I was with Los Alamos National Laboratory for 15 years as a licensed psychologist, but facilitating leadership development and also safety culture and organizational culture and development. And about a year ago, started my own consulting organization. Focused on the same aspects of organizational development.
Wonderful, thank you, Lisa. Earl?
Yes, hi there, Earl Carnes. I'm retired, like Bill. I'm fiddling around doing a few things. I also am predominantly nuclear in my career. Started off commercial, worked with the Institute of Nuclear Power Operations, then gravitated to the U.S. Department of Energy. And this is the kind of work predominantly that I did in addition to policy and some inspections, that kind of thing. I had the privilege of working with IAEA on their culture efforts and things like that. So I currently do some part-time things, looking, for example, right now at the Department of Energy COVID-18 response and how that's going. So that's where I'm from.
Wow, a lot of depth of experience here. Michael?
Hi, I'm Mike Teague. I'm a retired firefighter who is working on with a group of people to bring the safety to human and organizational performance stuff into the municipal fire service.
Neat.
Wonderful, well, that's great experience. A lot of complexity there.
Just a little.
Just a little. And Paul?
Hi, I'm Paul Daly. I'm in Dublin in Ireland. I work with a civil engineering company. I suppose I've been kind of signed into a few of Ron Gant's sessions there, and I'm relatively new to LinkedIn, so safety leadership popped up, so I clicked.
All right, welcome, Paul. Lindy?
So I'm Lindy Scott. I'm here in South Africa. So I run a company called the Health and Safety Dialogue Company. So what we do is help different organizations, mainly in mining, create internal comm strategies and culture strategies. And we're in the process now of building an online platform called Amber, which is a culture and communication platform for safety reps. So it's focused on Africa first, and then we're looking at other markets after that.
Oh, that's exciting to have Africa represented here. Kathleen?
Hey, I'm Kathy Dobson. I'm a safety director for a large construction company. I've worked with them for 20 years, and my focus is really on employee engagement and trying to improve the relationships between those safety guys and the rest of the world. As I was telling Tamara earlier, I used to be an enforcer. Now I try to be an influencer.
Congratulations, that's a big transformation. Tamara, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself as our host at large and making all of this possible through the miracle of the internet?
very honored, Rosa, to be here with you and Lisa. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I do work at Safepedia, and I'm the director of their community and social development. And so I'm just really glad that we can be doing something to help bring everybody together.
And Safepedia is our host, so I want to give credit. Eric, since you came on, hello, how are you today?
My name is Eric Labonte. I've been actively researching trends in safety for about 1.5 years now, but I've been working at Velocity EH&S for about 2.5 years roughly. My motive is to simply provide digestible, actionable, and easy to read content for safety professionals so they can get information on how to improve their day-to-day instantly away from technology, and using technology to just simply complement existing processes, but using their mind and relationships to kind of build some impact that maybe can happen through a simple perspective change. And I'm learning that is possible. So I'm here to learn from all of you more so than what I have to contribute. So I'll probably be humbly listening the most of the time today. Thank you.
Don't be too modest, Eric. Eric has a great model that I think would be great if safety professionals, especially getting started in the profession, you know, how to address some of the people issues. Let's see. I don't know if Harvey wants to introduce himself or Jim because they're
Sure. My name is Harvey Liss. I work for a company called Culture Change Consultants. I've worked on safety culture change for probably 20 years with about 70 different companies. And I have the proud distinction of having been trained by Rosa Carrillo.
Thank you, Harvey. And Harvey also has a lot of worldwide experience, Africa and Mexico, I mean, everywhere, right?
Worldwide.
Worldwide, yeah. And Jim, you're not
Hey,
on
good
visual.
morning, Rosa.
Good morning, Jim.
Hi, I'm Jim Marinas. I have a background in nuclear power generation for electricity, rode submarines in the nuclear Navy, have worked around the Department of Energy complex in various research aspects, and in the last 5 years have branched out and do consulting.
In what field?
All of those.
All fields, all right. Well, you can see that we have a huge depth of knowledge here. So I'm not here to be a teacher. I'm here to introduce some ideas and hopefully get some dialogue going because we're all tired of the talking heads and PowerPoints. At least I am. So I just wanted to, this is our very first time getting together. Tamara and Lisa and I thought about a few ground rules that we thought would help our dialogue and conversation. I don't think any of you will find it strange, but one is that to build on each other's ideas. So when we're going to, speak up and continue the conversation, let's acknowledge what went before, especially if we disagree, which we think is great if we have different points of view. We just have to acknowledge that the person that came before us. So if you disagree, then just repeat what you think you heard and have the person just kind of acknowledge, yeah, that's exactly what I said. Let's use the words I think and I feel so that we own our ideas. Any reactions to that or other thoughts in terms of what would help our dialogue just be open? We want to create a safe space here so that people can be authentic, be themselves, try out new ideas that maybe if you're thinking, wow, if I bring this up with my management team, will I be laughed out of the room or will I lose my credibility? So we want to leave all those kinds of worries outside the door. It's not an easy thing to do, but we're going to do our best. So any thoughts on that?
Sounds good to me.
So we will take silence as agreement then?
Yep.
You know that's not a good thing to do. So we'll use a lot of thumbs up and thumbs down to get some input as we move along. Thank you, Paul. Hey, yeah, that's right. We have emojis here that we can actually use during our talks. All right, so let me open up with some thoughts that I've been having since I published my book, and some of you might have read it, The Relationship Factor in Safety Performance, how to get employee engagement. And the whole focus of that book was the research that I had been gathering for many years on the importance of building relationships in the workplace. And I see that as a primary leadership competency, leadership responsibility to build those relationships. And so in my book, I expound on a lot of the reasons why and the research, which is very interesting, and it may come up during our discussion. But suffice it to say that this is not an original idea as much as just a very heartfelt recounting of my 25 years of experience in the field, meeting great leaders who fundamentally respect people, value their ideas, value their input. And they make everything look so easy, you know, things that other leaders or other managers, I should say, because if they were practicing leadership, it wouldn't be so hard, but other managers would be frustrated and just couldn't figure out how to get things done. And these leaders would just do it. And for example, in machine guarding, oh, the employees keep taking down the machine guards, or they keep disregarding the machine guards. And another leader would say, well, I have the employees do it, and they put it all in, and everybody follows it. So it's not anything brand new. And I started thinking about, okay, so what is the difference then, since the information has been out there for decades that relationships are important, and that in fact they contribute to productivity, better safety, better attendance at work, better collaboration, less conflict. And what comes to mind are the Tavistock mine industry in the 40s and 50s, when they began to discover that in order to improve efficiency, the mine owners had disbanded the original work groups and had assigned specific tasks to specific people. And for some reason, production went way down, accidents went up, people were reporting in sick, absent, and the Trist and Emery, Fred Emery and Eric Trist said, oh, we've actually broken up the natural structure of, it's almost like a family, right? The relationships on the team where people looked out for each other. When somebody got injured or hurt, they would actually take care of that person's family. They would help feed them and clothe them. That's the essence of what we're trying to do here. Unfortunately, over the years, and you guys will share your experiences, but we've told management when we train them, leave emotions at the door, feelings don't count. We have to do efficiency, put the emphasis on lean organizations and cost savings. And people don't realize, I'm not saying that people are bad, they just don't realize that they're actually undermining the social structure that makes the organization successful. So the social structure, my current motto is putting the socio back into sociotechnical. And so you'll be seeing that a lot, sociotechnical safety, which is not new again, but somehow we have to get, especially in our educational system and in our practitioners, a really clear understanding that if the social systems aren't functioning, it doesn't really matter how good your technical systems are, because that's why people aren't following the guidelines, they're not following the rules, they're not listening to each other, they don't trust management. And then we're not getting that information that we need. So we all say the most important thing is trust and open communication, but do we really understand exactly how that is built in the organization? So I don't know if I've said anything so far that resonates with you. Basically, I believe that man and woman's need to belong is the primary motivator and driver in organizations, and that almost everything we do is either consciously or unconsciously driven by the need to belong. So I'll leave it with that statement.
That's a great kickoff, and I am very interested in hearing everybody's ideas. I do want to just ask, if we're not speaking, if we can mute ourselves, because we are getting some background noise.
Okay, I will mute.
And who is interested in going first? Maybe anybody want to volunteer? Yeah, go ahead, Philip.
So I work in a very multicultural organization. A lot of what you say resonates with me as a Westerner, but I'm not sure it's the same with the Asian partners with whom we work, and their levels of issues or things like power distance and the impact that that has on the socio-technical side of their work environments is very, very different to that we have with the Western, particularly our American IMPO counterparts, and it does cause some serious challenges, and there is often unspoken friction, and it's I'm not sure how much we really understand this. I think I'm in a unique environment. Nuclear power plants have been built in all parts of the world, but we have a plant that's being built to be owned and operated by Arabs. It's being constructed by Koreans, and it's being operated to the IMPO model. And our management team is 95% American, and that does cause some difference. So interested in your views and opinions from the rest of the group.
Now, that's a really excellent point, Philip, and I'd like to hear from the folks that have worked in the Middle East and Asia, because power distance is very real. So, anybody with experience on that subject?
Yeah, Rosa, let me just mention something. We work for a company that builds small, mid-sized turbines for offshore platforms. And I was working in Indonesia. And I always read a book about where I'm going to go work. And in any case, this book referred to a concept called Abal Bapak Senang, which in Bahasa, I probably didn't pronounce it correctly, means father knows best. And the book was describing Indonesian culture. It wasn't specific to the, energy industry. But it turned out that when I learned of this concept and shared those words with the workforce, who were primarily Indonesian, just everybody lit up and actually said the letters ABS, because that had a tremendous influence on whether they were going to be willing to speak up working on a platform. Because in that case, the father would have been the facility manager, and they work pretty much alone representing their company. And so it really put them between a rock and a hard place, because they ran the risk of not being allowed to come back. And I encountered this in Angola as well, same sort of thing. So I think what Phil's raising is, a very important point about the variety of cultures that you're dealing with.
So just to follow up on that, Harvey, so people lit up, and what did that mean specifically then in terms of how you were able to move forward?
Yeah, well, having said lit up, actually what it meant is that somebody understood or introduced a key thing for them. And that actually opened up the dialogue. I mean, we were debriefing on a survey and so forth. And since I don't know, there were maybe 30 people in the session, and I would imagine that 25 of them were Indonesians, and there were, the Europeans were there as well. But and also I would say that all those people saying ABS out loud created space for them, because it meant they were not alone in thinking that.
So leveraging the culture, leveraging a deep belief in the culture opens the way. And back to Phil's point, I don't know what everybody's reaction to this is, but there is power distance, but the need to belong remains constant and consistent. It's just that there's different rules to belong in each culture. Each culture has its own rules to belong, so I think it behooves us to find out what those rules are.
I would just relate to a true story, a real story, and it poses some questions associated with power distance and the depth of it, the depth of feeling associated with it. Very close to our accommodation was what was referred to as a golf club. Certainly wasn't a golf club. It was more like a social club. That's what I refer to it as. They had a happy hour for 3 hours every evening, where the beer was cheap, and Korean work parties would arrive, and you would see them arrive. You would see them get their alcohol, and they would arrange around a table. They would then be instructed, please sit by the leader, the senior person, whoever it was, and it was very, very clear the social structure, until maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours into the evening, as they drunk more alcohol, that seemed to go completely. The social structure, power distance was right out the window with the lubrication of alcohol. It's just a side note.
You were able to be more authentic under the influence. Who's holding back? It's my experience that, and I talk about this because some people hold back because they think, I don't want to dampen anybody else's participation, and so we don't want that to happen here. If you have the experience or you have a firm opinion, please throw it out. One of the things that I want to introduce into our ongoing group is that if you want to be a change agent, the place to start is with yourself. Because knowing who you are, being self-aware is the starting place. And that's where the socio-emotional skills are so important in a leader. And I know I can see you guys, nodding your heads, because the kinds of things we're talking about in terms of leading an organization require empathy. They require the ability to listen. They require the ability to solve and help people solve complex problems, which means that you're not there so much to solve problems, but to be able to engage the group in the solution of the problem. So this is a work starting with yourself in your own personal domain. So you need the systems, thinking skills, you need the social-emotional skills, and I would say the third of that three-legged stool is mindfulness, which is a practice that keeps you centered and open and able to work in very stressful situations. I can't imagine a more stressful situation than nuclear, having worked in that arena for a long time. There's so many rules and the whole notion of safety culture is so rigid and so ingrained that it's very stressful. It's a very stressful place to work. So please, feel free to bring in whatever you're thinking of or working on at this point that you feel is really going to make a difference in terms of us being effective and successful.
I'll share a bit, if I may, Rosa.
Yes, please, Aaron.
Okay, just an example. Some of you are aware, but in New Mexico, there is a deep underground mine for the storage of nuclear waste. A few years ago, there was an accident there, a fire, which is not a good thing to happen in a mine. It cost several $1 billion to restore this as a national issue, and actually a worldwide implication. So a year or so ago, when I was visiting with a team of mine there, this issue came up about what you were talking about, power distance, subcultures. And the point I want to illustrate by explaining this just briefly is that, as you were touching on, the problem of misdiagnosing a technical or regulatory issue for what in fact is at root a social issue, okay? So all this work was done, to revise the procedures and develop a lot of new processes along the lines of nuclear safety. I go in with a group of mining specialists and have a focus group with them. Very, very thoughtful individuals, highly experienced. They came from a deep mining, deep level mines experience to this operation. So it came out during the discussion that they felt like that the nuclear people had come in and completely disrespected the culture of their discipline. Very accomplished individuals, some with 30 years of experience, and simply said, your experience doesn't matter, i.e. you don't matter. We're in charge, we make the rules. So all the work that had been done for a couple of years was on the making the rules stronger side, not recognizing that the fundamental issue to build from was this relationship between, actually among several competing cultures. And they had brought a couple of new executives in who were more sensitive to relationships. They were using the word relational management, okay? They spent a lot more time working, and I brought up something in our exit comments because I was saying, what does this remind me of? As someone who does oversight, it hit me that what it reminded me of was in, as you well know, the medical world, where you have the idea of the second victim. And so the second victim are typically the nurses, the technicians, so forth, who are involved in some process that suddenly something happened, no fault of their own. Same kind of thing with these mining experts. They were doing what they thought was the right kind of thing to do in their culture. But then other people came and said, no, it was because you weren't smart enough. You didn't follow our orders, things like this. And so, in fact, you had a group of people who were the victims also, okay? They were social victims of things over which they had no control. And by voicing that to the CEO, who was sympathetic, it was, now I have a concept I can deal with, and we can start a new way of having a conversation. So, it's for inspectors, having this perspective you're talking about, trying to say what actually is going on here is a very valuable thing from my experience, because most people get tied up in the technical and legal network out there and just completely miss. You have to go back and start the relationships.
Thank you.
I'd like to kind of build on that too, because I think I've seen it so many times where somebody will come in and just really take over an environment with their ideas without first kind of stepping back and being humble and checking in, what has actually been going on. And Kathleen, I think this goes to what we were speaking to today about learning from the workers. Would you agree?
Oh yeah, absolutely. You know, and you have to understand what you're getting into and where you're going. I mean, I can relate to a situation where we had brought a project manager, very opinionated, very much into I'm the man kind of a guy, and we put him on a mine site. Now, keep in mind, this is a surface area, and we were breaking ground on a green site, and so there was no mining activities going on, but the work fell under MSHA, and he would constantly tell people, I don't care about MSHA, we're just doing it this way. And when it was brought up that there were issues that needed to be corrected, for instance, a berm needed to be placed on a roadway. And he said, we'll get to that roadway at the end when we put up guardrails. And so somebody contacted MSHA, because within MSHA, as opposed to OSHA, you have to fix things right away. There's no prioritization on which hazard gets fixed first. They all get fixed immediately. And so he didn't understand the culture of the mining industry. And so it can get you into a lot of trouble that way.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I want to go back to the social, what did you call it, Earl? It was like a social accident or injury, right? We never talk about what happens to people as injuries, but that's really what it is that when we are disrespectful or don't listen to someone, is it really about the fact that, well, we know the rules and regulations and you don't, or is it because you just disrespected me? And so I would like to talk about that. How can we make our safety professionals, our managers, and then I would like it to go beyond safety professionals. I'm talking about, because ultimately the supervisors and managers are the ones that need to that implement this, but to begin to take the social system as seriously as they take the technical system. Any thoughts?
Rosa, I'd like to throw something out here.
Yeah.
Can you hear me? I think
Yes.
I'm off mute. You know, we've done ourselves a disservice by equating credibility with what can be measured in a very technical way. And as a consequence, those aspects of performance that are not observable necessarily, but have huge impact, have been overridden and undermined as unsubstantial. And I'm thinking of Donna Hicks, who came and gave a talk at Los Alamos National Laboratory, and she recited some very interesting research that had been done studying brain and emotional pains, resilience, and how it hangs in there, much greater than physical pain. So when they measured movement in the brain after somebody had been insulted, let's say, that light up on that part of the brain stayed longer than somebody whose pain of breaking an arm. And because it's only since we're able to measure that impact that now we're giving some credence to those aspects.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Long story short, I think that has contributed, that lack of being able to measure and demonstrate impact from the emotional has had a huge impact on our ability to embrace it.
And we made those rules ourselves, didn't we? That only what is measurable is valid. We made up the rules. I don't think they were handed down to us by Moses, were they?
No. And much more significantly in technical organizations. Too bad Moses wasn't there.
Well, so social injuries are equal to physical injuries in terms of your organizational performance?
Maybe even more sustaining.
Yeah,
more injurious.
I didn't know about that, those studies that you were talking about. I know I was reading about the cyberball game where one of the team members, they were not tossing it to that team member. That was the experiment. And the part of his brain that lit up was the same part that where you experience physical pain. So exclusion is actually feels like a physical injury. So thinking back in your own life and your own experience, does that ring true for you? Go ahead, Jim.
I'll just comment, and there are several on this call that will be able to relate to this, I'm sure. When I started working in the Department of Energy System, one of the first tasks that I had was to almost completely rewrite the procedural set for the research community, because it had been written with a little bit of prejudice against the research approach. And in fact, it was really accelerated by the shutdown of Los Alamos. If you guys all may remember, there had been an accusation of loss of control of classified material, and there had been a laser ice strike and a couple of other pretty noteworthy events, and some in the predominant technical side of the business, many from ex-Navy environments, came in and proclaimed that the research community was full of cowboys and buttheads. And that got inserted throughout the Department of Energy approach. And somebody coming in as an eminent researcher was left in a position of having to defend their approach before they could even start doing work. So we had to reframe the conversation, and we had to provide the space for the research community to be able to interact and relate using their own terminology, and hold that technical side of the business, which was predominantly procedures and processes and systems based, and all of that conversation at bay, and give the research community the room to be able to talk using their own terminology. Long story short, at least in Idaho, that resulted in a sustained period, decades of unprecedented funding, advances in research, and actual support of a very good work environment for the research community. And it was something that eventually was recognized by the other side, the operations focused individuals. But it was a really tough road. But it was, as you're saying, Rose, it was based on providing an opportunity to have the conversations and the trust and the psychological safety that was necessary for those individuals in the research community to blossom.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Jim, I just want to add some very interesting historical perspective that also highlights how culture is so contextual. I was pulled in after Nanos, who was director at the time of the Buttheads and Cowboys comment, by a physicist. And he had been at the lab for almost 30 years at the time. And he showed me a document that had been put out by one of the first directors. I think it was Dan Brown. And Director Brown had been asking for the Cowboys to come out and take charge and drive forward in scientific research. And that was the desired culture at the time. So talk about creating, one, hypocrisy in leadership, but also creating real angst for people of which way are we supposed to move, be cowboys or not be cowboys here. It was very interesting.
Bill, were you going to say something? You took yourself off mute there.
I was just going to address the topic of communication. I come from the technical side of this whole equation. I'm an engineer. And so my task over the years has to been build systems and tools to help people make good decisions, no matter what the context. But that has led to the realization that you have to provide a common language for communication across the disciplines and across the organizations, and even with the regulatory authorities. And so in my recent work in the oil and gas industry, both for pipelines and offshore drilling, we had the opportunity to test some of those things. When you've developed tools or structures to support assessment of a situation and making good decisions, they provide a common language for communication. And even as I've said, communication with the regulators. We involved the offshore drilling regulator, BSEE, in the development of a new blowout preventer for deep water drilling. And we were in the process of using this approach and actually capturing the rules for regulatory decision-making during operations. And it turned out to be, from what we could see, a very effective means to create this common understanding so that everybody agreed to what the objectives of the operation were, and you could have upfront some understanding of how you would behave or how you would decide in a certain situation.
And that's really important to creating psychological safety, because people know, right, what to expect. So Bill, as an engineer, what do you think about all this social systems talk?
Well, I actually think it's essential, because the technical systems cannot function properly if the social systems aren't properly addressed. And so I think we need to come from both sides and meet in the middle and address both. And although I'm an engineer by training and have worked, to develop tools for operations people and engineers and management, you still have to make sure that you've got the social environment so that things will function properly. And as you say, people will feel enabled, empowered to do the right thing at the right time. And in fact, some of our work with pipeline companies focused on that very much, because we would get called in after a major accident where the problem was that the operators didn't detect a situation, and you ended up with well, in fact, one of the situations, by the time we got there, the people involved had been fired. And in our analysis of the incident, we weren't doing the initial incident investigation, but in our assessment of the situation, we found out that the operators had not violated the procedures. The procedures did not require them to act within any certain time frame. And needless to say, there was a little bit of an aha moment where the control center management said, "Oh, we fired those people." So it's all important.
Did they bring them back, Bill?
Not that I'm aware of. In fact, I think they said, fortunately, they found good jobs elsewhere.
Good jobs. Yeah.
Pipeline operators were in great demand and still are, I assume.
Well, Ed Schein remarked to me the other day that perhaps the social systems are primary because if the social systems aren't in place to support what you're trying to do technically, your technical solutions aren't likely to work. What do you guys think about that? Because I've gotten some pushback, because people say, no, we have to make them equal. We have to make social and technical equal.
Let me react to that quickly, Rosa.
Yeah.
so many of the things that I've been involved with, the system failed because people did not have the right information to make a good decision. So in those circumstances, you can have the best culture. You can have the best culture in the world. Everybody can feel good about each other and have good relations. But if people don't have the right information and tools to make the right decision, it's all for naught. So I think it has to be equal.
Mhm.
I just kind of wanted to build on this. You know, it brings my mind back to many, many years ago when I first started in safety. And I was in Central America, actually. And I was sent to, like, they were finding out that the workers were doing things contrary to the procedures that were set out by the North American construction management. And so I was sent over to find out why the workers on the operational side were not going through the practices that had been sent by the management side. And for those of you who know me, I have a social work background, so I kind of come at things from that perspective. And I started talking to the workers, and they thought that what management had set down was totally loco, crazy, because the way that they were doing it was much safer because they weren't putting workers at risk. And so it was like bringing the two to the table to understand that how the workers saw safety for the work to be done was very different than what the North American management, who weren't on the job site at all, were perceiving to be safe. And it was very interesting that when the two came together, how they kind of learned from one another about different ways of doing it. And in fact, the North American management then started to agree on the Rotanians' way of doing it. Although it took more people to do the job, the way that they wanted to do it was in fact eliminating certain risks that the North American management hadn't thought about, because they were so used to doing it a different way with different types of equipment in North America, that the Rotanians didn't also have access to. So that was a beautiful thing to do, that when that space for conversation was opened, the learning on both sides.
Mm-hmm. Nice example.
Hi, I kind of joined late. Hi, Lisa.
Hey, yeah.
I know Lisa because she did a lot of work with us. I'm from Pantex in Amarillo. So I wanted to comment on what Tamara had to say. I'm a black belt, and I also have studied and written on organizational behavior and culture change. And what I've learned working within engineering and manufacturing is we have engineers, and well, we have all trades, but all disciplines. But I've noticed mainly with engineering, when we find a lot of things that go wrong, is we have engineers, and I'm referencing what Tamara said on the social background, with the different cultures. It's very, very obvious, very visible. We have engineers from DOD, DOE, corporate America. They travel internationally. And then we have engineers that have been at Pantex their entire career. And when they come in and do a project, they cannot communicate with each other. And it's not that they don't want to or that they're choosing not to. They just don't realize that they're speaking different languages. And they are so set in their culture and their behavior, how things were processed and done. And I'm not an engineer. I teach, I'm a college professor online and in the evenings, and then I work at Pantex. So I came in and I thought, I'm not going to fit in because I'm not an engineer. But the person that brought me in said, this is why I need you, because it's not that they weren't wanting the change or that they weren't wanting to learn how to communicate better. It was just that they were all speaking their own jargon, and nobody was ready to change it because, I mean, you've been doing it for so long, right? So it's really, really interesting, because when I go out and I find an issue, when we do a black belt project on something, I'm not telling them what they did wrong. We're pointing out exactly what the where the process failed. And it could be what we call, at Pantex, the term is used tribal knowledge because it's been there forever. And we call it the founding fathers of Pantex, right? It's been there, it's never changed. So, and even though they try to change the procedure, it was never executed. So we have to go in there, and we don't say, well, we need to change our behavior, because they automatically feel defensive. Sometimes they take that as defensive, like, what's wrong with my behavior? So the approach we have to use is how can we get your knowledge to make this better? Because they are our SMEs. So it's really, really interesting when you talk about your social background, because what I'm doing is I'm trying to get a collaboration of everybody, because we have some amazing just geniuses at work that they just have a hard time collaborating and sharing their ideas and applying them, right? Because we can listen all day long, but it's a demonstration, the application, and all of these other things. So it's really, really interesting when I listen to all of you talk from all of your different backgrounds and experiences. I did come in late, but with my job, I'm having to go into a culture that it's a very strong culture. And as Pantex has changed with this new contractor, and our mission is becoming a lot more, I don't know what's the right word to say, but we're getting extremely busy. We're getting new programs. We're getting very, very busy. To just keep it very general, it's very interesting because we're getting a lot more diversity in the engineering world. We're getting engineers that we've never had to use before, that have different focus on different disciplines. And so I'm learning a lot just listening to how the issues that some of you have experienced. And I'm interested in how you don't ever want to repeat history, right? And I've been at Pantex for about 17 years. And so it's really interesting because I know some of the history, but we have engineers that have been out there 30 or 40 years. And we're trying to and they're knowledgeable, but we're getting engineers that are very new. And so listening to culture and how culture changes and how you're able to impact it. Because you're right, I have seen, we can probably build another building on the amount of money that we've lost in effort, just because someone didn't want to deal with the changes or there was no communication. Mm-hmm. So I'm also a trainer on ProSci AdCar. I don't know if you guys are aware of that. So I use that model a whole lot. I use that a lot. And I don't tell the people I'm using it, but I use it. I bring that awareness, that desire, that knowledge, the ability, the reinforcement, everything that they need to help them make those changes in steps. So I'm going to have to check out a little bit. That's why I kind of popped in, because I'm teleworking until coronavirus kind of calms everything down here in our town. We're considered a hotspot. So, but I wanted to plug that in because I'm interested to come back into the next one, because all of this helps me when I deal with people and change, and how I can better apply my models, the tools that I'm using. So
I would like to just respond to that one. I see a real connection to what you've just described with the common nomenclature to what Bill had mentioned a bit ago. And that only compounds the problem, doesn't it? Because they're brilliant and they're locked into their way of pursuing things, these different engineering factions. And now, they also don't have a common means of communicating. And the other thing I just wanted to throw out, I've been just getting more interested in David Snowden's work, and he's talked more about getting away from culture and talking about identities, and how what I'm hearing you describe are these new engineers of different backgrounds and maybe generational differences, and how they form a different identity than what might be exist. And maybe talking about these as identities and being open to each other's identity is kind of an interesting paradigm shift. I have nothing more to say about that, but that might be future fodder for one of these conversations. Is it identity or?
I agree. That's a great topic, because I would really like to delve into the use of the word culture. Certainly safety culture is out for me, because you can't separate safety out from the rest of the organization. And instead, there's all of these subcultures within the organization, and we have to communicate differently with each one. So that's the challenge that we're in, and I look forward to building on that. And on a last note with Bill, you've raised an excellent point that if people don't have the information, then it doesn't matter how well they get along. And I want to emphasize that the social aspect of safety isn't about friends and getting along, really. It's about understanding how we impact each other, how we're miscommunicating, and having that self-awareness to know that something like that is going on, because that's not something that we're taught in our universities and even in our management programs. We simply aren't taught to be tuned in to those aspects of communication. So I can give you the best informed article that I can come up with, but that doesn't mean, number one, you're going to read it, and number two, that you're going to understand it. So that's where the social aspect comes in for me.
Can I share something briefly?
Yeah,
I posted
we've got
2 videos.
1 or 2 minutes left.
I'll be very quick. I posted 2 videos. One's a short video. Both are with Edgar Schein. Edgar Schein in one video talks about his challenge with getting engineers to communicate cohesively. They all had brilliant ideas and they couldn't really put them all together. And I won't give it away, but he solves the problem very simply by getting them, by not, the quote I put here is, it ultimately wasn't, he wasn't trying to influence them in the way he wanted. He had to figure out what was the best way to influence them from the way they could understand. And then the second video is quite longer. It's a Google Talk with, again, Ed Schein. And he talks about his challenges at DEC. And again, so he learned that ultimately that was the potential downfall, as well as the engineers were arguing with each other, and then they broke off into different departments, and there was a lack of communication. And then beyond that, there was also hostility, because people were trying to pitch the best product, and they weren't looking for the best interest of the company. They were looking for the best interest of their jobs, their livelihood, and not of the actual idea itself. So you may like both those videos. I thought they were insightful. And yeah.
I just want to, before we sign off, I want to let everybody know that I am going to be sending out an email with those resources in it. And if you do have resources for other people in the group, please share it amongst yourselves. And I also wanted to really encourage people to network with one another, take this opportunity. That's why we're doing this, so that, you know, it's not about just collecting numbers on LinkedIn. It's about making sure that these connections that we're getting are actually helping to drive us as human beings, as professionals, as we go. And I'm just going to put a little plug in that we are doing a Safety Connect virtual conference expo in October. And I'm going to send everybody the link in case you want to register for that too. It's totally free. And Rosa, I'll give you the floor for the last minute.
Oh, no, thank you. Thank you everyone for attending. I am very humbled by your presence, because you are all such amazing people and have so much knowledge. So thank you for coming and helping us kick off our experiment.
Thank you.
I will say I just sent a quote from Diane Vaughn to all of you, and it's speaking to your point, Bill. And we could maybe pick this up as a topic next time we visit.
Thank you, Bill.
Send in those topics. Excellent. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.